Hello again, Mrs. Connor from Pilgrim School. I'm here to do a few books for Black History Month, some of my new favourites that came in boxes of books late last year that I've been reading at home, and super excited to learn about new people, as I have been saying. This story is called Harriet Powers, Journey from Slave to Artist, Sewing Stories. It's published by Alfred Knopf, and I'll just check the copyright date here. It is from 2015, and written by Barbara Herkert, illustrated by Vanessa Brantley-NEWTON. The end papers have some of the quilting work that she did, and it has a quote saying, "Sing-a-ho, that I had the wings of a dove, I'd fly away and be at rest." Is our title page. See that sweet baby lying on a quilt her mama made? What could she be dreaming of? On a plantation near Athens, Georgia, Harriet's mama worked from rise to set while Harriet slept between the cotton rows. Harriet Angeline Powers was born into slavery on October 29, 1837, according to Clark County records. She was one of 5,000 African Americans in bondage in that county alone. There's like a little snippet of fact on each page. You can see it's might be cut out from a piece of fabric, which is very cool. Harriet grew up watching women carding cotton, spinning thread, dyeing and weaving cloth. She learned that wild indigo made blue, hickory bark made brown, and cherry bark made deep red. She studied strong, stained fingers. Her heart beat to the booming of the loom. Slave women were involved in making textiles for the plantation. After they spun cotton into thread, they dyed it with natural coloring and wove it into cloth on a loom. In the evening, the women gathered together and cut flour sacks and worn clothes into suns and moons and stars, lions, birds, and elephants for appliqued cloth legends of Mother Africa. Harriet listened to their voices hum throughout the quarters late into the night. Some slave women sewed all day for the slaveholder's family. Only at night could they create for themselves. Applique is a technique where cut designs are stitched onto background fabric. The master frowned on slaves staying up late to sew. Little Harriet placed cotton filling in the quilt. She held the pine knot light high. "I won't nod off, no, ma'am." She was part of a sacred tribe. By a crumbling fireplace in the middle of the night, Harriet learned to sew stories. Most slaves were forbidden to learn to read and write. They passed on stories verbally and recorded them in cloth. Women sang and sewed by candle or pine knot light in rough log cabins in a section of the plantation called the quarters. On Sundays and holidays, sometimes the master gave permission for a quilting bee. The women lowered wooden frames from cabin rafters. Long-limbed Harriet crawled under those big frames and watched needles dart through cloth like silver dragonflies. She thought, "Someday I'm going to sew a magic world." While the mistress of the plantation usually supervised the sewing, at a quilting bee the slave women could be their own artists, making designs with strips of cloth. For a few daylight hours, they might have felt free. When the women finished sewing, making 2 or 3 quilts in just one day, folks gathered for peach pie and ginger cake, collard greens and barbecue. While they gobbled up the grub, Harriet traced quilted shapes with her finger. Her mamma smiled. "Child, I think it's time you had a needle of your own." "Yes, ma'am." The men were not allowed at the gathering until the quilting was over. Then they were invited in for a big meal, followed by a lively dance party. The women raised chickens and grew extra food in small gardens. They cooked in big open fireplaces. Strong-limbed Harriet helped the women sew. Afterwards, she danced at the frolic. Horsehair fiddles, cheese-box tambourines, and sheep-bone drums formed the band. If Armstead Powers could capture Harriet beneath a quilt, he could claim a hug and a kiss. Harriet slowed her pace just a little bit. Sure enough, Armstead caught her with a story. Young ladies gathered at the quilting bees as much to dance and flirt as to sew. They danced the turkey trot and the Mary Jane. Buckets, pans, and grass reeds were also used as musical instruments. Harriet and Armstead jumped the broom together when Harriet was just 18. Soon Harriet became a mamma. She named her pretty baby Amanda. "Pray we stay together and don't get sold away," she said. When Harriet and Armstead decided to marry in 1855, they had to get permission from the slaveholder. Part of the ceremony was jumping over a broomstick. The Civil War began in 1861, a bloody war to end slavery. Harriet wrapped Amanda in a quilt she made and held her tight as Civil War cannons fired. The army from the north marched into Athens. The Union soldiers told the slaves, "You're free." "Hallelujah, free at last," Harriet cried. But trouble didn't end with the war. Oh no. Poverty raced through Georgia. How would Harriet feed her family? Amanda, Alonzo, Nancy, Lizzie, and baby Marshall. 5 hungry faces, 10 bare feet. "Show me the way," Harriet prayed. The Emancipation Proclamation declared the slaves free on New Year's Day, 1863, but it could not be enforced in areas still under rebellion. In Georgia, slaves were not freed until Union General Sherman's army invaded in 1864. Slaves in Athens were most likely emancipated sometime after the fall of Atlanta in September 1864. In Athens, the aftermath of the war was worse than the war itself. Food, medicine, and clothing were scarce. Smallpox ravaged the town. Harriet took up her needle, turning snips of calico and an old pair of dungarees into cloth stories that warmed her children and lifted her from hard times for a while. "You got to take what you've been given and make something out of it," she said. In addition to making quilts, Harriet may have earned extra money by sewing clothes. Armstead earned very little as a farmhand. Harriet saved every extra nickel. The family bought a little farm, a horse, a plough, and some seed. Now plates of catfish steamed on the table. Fat vegetables ripened on the vine. The children grew like the cotton Armstead planted. Cotton mills popped up all over Georgia, and folks celebrated good times. Sometime in the 1880s, Harriet and Armstead bought 4 acres near Sandy Creek outside of Atlanta. The family fished and grew vegetables and profitable cotton. Cotton mills purchased cotton from local farmers like Armstead. Athens announced its own party, the Cotton Fair. Folks were abuzz about the craft exhibit. Who would win best in show? "I reckon the good Lord gave me a skill," Harriet said. She snipped calico as pink as watermelon. She cut strips of cloth as green as key limes. Harriet sewed stories of Cain and Abel, Jacob and Jesus too, familiar stories that formed pictures in her mind. She stitched Bible folks in scenes where polka-dotted camels, elephants, and ostriches lived together in a fabric land. Harriet had grown up hearing Bible stories from the chairbacker, a slave who proclaimed he'd been called to preach. She might have sat in the back at the slaveholder's church. She was fascinated by circus animals. The Northeast Georgia Fair of 1886, called the Cotton Fair, included a Wild West show, several weddings, and a craft exhibit. Folks entering the craft exhibit competed for best in show, but Harriet was not reported as the winner. Folks at the Cotton Fair gathered around Harriet's quilt. A young woman, Jenny Smith, offered to buy it. How could Harriet part with a piece of her heart? "No, ma'am, not for any price." Harriet hung her quilt in the corner of the exhibit tent. next to seed displays, jars of pickles, and mounds of potatoes. Jenny Smith, an art teacher, recognised it as a rare work of art. Dark days came a-knocking when the price of cotton fell. Harriet sent word. Would Miss Smith still like the quilt? Oh, yes. Harriet climbed into an ox cart, and as Armstead drove her into town, she cradled that quilt like a child. Harriet told Miss Smith, "You can have it for $10. "I only have 5 to give," Miss Smith replied. "I reckon that'll do, owing to the hardness of the times." Then Harriet explained each story sewn within the squares, like the lyrics of a song spun into cloth. She climbed back in that ox cart, and as Armstead drove away, her lap felt as empty as her heart. Miss Smith wrote down Harriet's descriptions of the 11 panels of her creation. "It is my intention," Miss Smith wrote, "to exhibit this quilt in the Colored Building at the Cotton States Exposition in Atlanta." Now folks were a-talking. Could Harriet make another story quilt? Oh, yes. She pieced together Bible stories and tales of real events in the sky, a meteor shower, bright lights burning in the night. It was snowing fire, Harriet said. On a day called Black Friday, the sky grew dark as midnight and all the cows and roosters went to bed. Harriet delivered the quilt to some ladies in Atlanta, slipping their dollar bills into her apron pocket. Her heart was heavy. Another beloved sold away. Still, it pleased her to hear the women's praise. Some Atlanta University faculty wives saw the first quilt at the exposition and commissioned the second quilt as a gift for the vice president of the board. This time Harriet mixed Bible stories with local tales and legends she'd grown up hearing. The meteor shower of 1833 and Black Friday of 1780, when a combination of smoke from forest fires, a thick fog, and cloud cover caused an unusual darkening of the sky. We don't know how much Harriet earned for the second quilt, but it attracted a lot of attention. In 1902, Atlanta University held a conference called the Negro Artisan. Harriet's quilt may have inspired the event. Harriet never had much money. She didn't own much property. It was a struggle to get by. Her cloth stories lifted her to another world where suns and moons, animals and angels danced together across a fabric sky. One day I shall reach heaven, and one day shall I fly. Harriet Powers died of pneumonia on January 1st, 1910. Now everyone can see the world as she did, for her work hangs in 2 fine museums and is celebrated worldwide. Oops. That kind of feels like it should be that way, the illustration. She's really beautiful, don't you think? I think Vanessa Brantley-Newton did an awesome job with these illustrations. There's a small author's note, so I'm going to read that and then show you a picture of Harriet and some of her quilts. Harriet Powers lived most of her life in poverty. Today her story quilts are priceless treasures. The first story quilt, the Bible quilt, resides at the National Museum of American History, part of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. The second pictorial quilt resides at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. No other quilts by Harriet are known to exist, although recent scholarship indicates she made at least 5. Harriet knew her quilts needed to be explained, and Jenny Smith had the foresight to record her words. A handwritten essay filled with Harriet's cloth stories and the circumstances of Jenny and Harriet's meeting was preserved with the first story quilt. Jenny invited Harriet to visit her child at any time, and apparently Harriet did on several occasions. We don't know who recorded the descriptions of the second story quilt. Although she never travelled outside of Georgia and never went to a formal school, Harriet's artistic vision was vast. Jenny likened her style to that of the Impressionists. "I regret exceedingly that it is impossible to describe the gorgeous colouring of the work," she wrote. Harriet grew up surrounded by applique artisans and perpetuated this quilt-making technique into adulthood. Although the colours have faded, Harriet's art is an invitation into her thoughts, her life, and her dreams. Her story quilts lift us high. And there's a description of the photograph. Harriet was photographed sometime in 1896 or 1897 at the professional studio of art Charles F. McDaniel in Athens, Georgia, wearing an apron decorated with applique symbols of a cross and a sun. This photograph may have been taken when her quilt was exhibited. It is the only known photograph of Harriet, although another copy of it appeared in the collection of the Lee County Historical Society in Iowa. There's the two quilts with an explanation of each one. I'm sure if you wanted to find out a little bit more about that, it would be interesting to look it up online and see them and see where they're exhibited. And the end papers shows a little bit more. It's hard to see. I can't take this piece off because it's taped to the book. But as you can see, it's quite beautiful. All right, well, I hope you learned something today about something you didn't know about, a person you were unfamiliar with. Harriet Powers was new to me this last school year, and I'm super excited to have learned something more about her. And I hope one day to get to see the quilts in person at those museums. Thanks for tuning in.